Hello everyone, how are you doing? Right, just heading to the shed to get a beer, so it seems like a good moment to take a couple of minutes to talk about Six Nations and the idea of having it over 5 weeks from a player welfare perspective. So with the discussions going on about the world calendar in 2020, the Aviva Premiership have suggested that the Six Nations could take place over 5 weekends rather than 7 that it is currently, in order to free up time so that they can shuffle and do other things during the season. The main objection that has come back from this in the sort of public has been about player welfare, and saying that the toll of Test match rugby of 5 weekends on the trot would be a lot on players, and this is very true. The point I made yesterday was that actually this was similar to a Rugby World Cup, and it's good preparation for a Rugby World Cup, and I think that is obviously the case, as I said yesterday. So the other piece that I would say about the player welfare side is that it's not that they would obviously need, just like in the Rugby World Cup, there's a set time after that the players have to rest. You would obviously have to put that in place for the Six Nations. But also player welfare is not just about games played, it's also about training. And one of the things that is in place for at least the EPS players in the Aviva Premiership is a set number of minutes that they're allowed to play. Now, one of the problems with that is that it's minutes, not games. And so for props, for example, who will normally get substituted after 60 minutes, that means they can play a lot more games than, say, a centre or a winger who plays the full game and isn't regularly substituted. So I think that from a player welfare point of view, we need to actually start thinking about not only the number of minutes that players play during a season, but the number of games they play as well. Because when the World Rugby did their review on injuries, there were two things that really came out of that I think worked people out. One was that the tackler got injured more often than the ball carrier, but also that actually a large proportion of the injuries were in training, not actually in game time. So what we need to also have now is understanding that player welfare isn't just about the number of minutes someone plays, or it's also about the number of games, but not because of the games they're playing necessarily, but because of the having to prepare for each of those games in the week lead up to that. And so players need to have some weeks off during the season to recuperate, not just having to reduce the number of minutes by having them substituted all the time, as we see in, say, the front row or other members of the pack who are more regularly substituted than in the backs. So yes, I understand there will be a player welfare issue, but I think we can mitigate it by adding in that number of games per season the players allowed to play, and also putting in a mandatory rest period after the Six Nations for the international players who have played, so they get to recuperate after those 5 grueling weeks. So just a quick chat about that, and thank you people for listening. So just a quick question there. So pretty much doing what Henry did, the reconditioning thing. I think, well, apart from the there's obviously a lot of prehab pieces are now a part of all general play. But I mean, what Henry did, I think you were talking about, was giving all the, if you're talking about the World Cup year where he gave everyone off the sort of the first half of Super Rugby. I'm not sure that's necessarily the way to go with this. But one of the things the All Blacks did last year ahead of the World Cup was every player had to have 2 weeks off, to give all the international players had to have 2 weeks off, which gave them a rest during the season. They didn't have to be consecutive weeks, but yes, they said that, right, you can only solve the 18 rounds of Super Rugby, and there was, I think, with 15 games in that, so you can only play 13 out of the 15 games. But you also do see the All Blacks going back later after the November tours into pre-season, and we also see the same thing happening in the Aviva Premiership. The English, the players that have been on tours now over the June tours come back later into pre-season. I think it's in this mandatory 5-week break now, part of the player contracts between the end of the tour and then returning to their clubs. So yes, those breaks we are seeing those breaks in there, and it's a matter of I just think that another one after the Six Nations would be needed if they did condense it down to 5 weeks. So, thank you everybody. Please do share this and have a look back at some of my other rugby thoughts on Periscope. I do really appreciate you guys watching it, and also leave me comments, having a chat on Twitter. Thanks guys.